Everybody, thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. If you're listening to our podcast for the first time on YouTube, thanks so much. If you're listening to us on the radio, we also thank you for that. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon, and the rest of them, thanks so much. We really appreciate it. Please subscribe, like, and share this interview. It's with an important person that's doing amazing things throughout California. And we hope to learn a lot about COVID in general. And also, she does have a book out, which I'll tease, and we'll talk a little bit about that besides COVID. It's called Let's Talk Shit: Disease, Digestion, and Fecal Transplants. So Sabine Hazan, thanks so much, Doc, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. So can you just tell, I know I talked a little bit, Doc, about all the stuff that you've done so far, but can you kind of go deep into the stuff that you do right now? Because you're involved in a little bit of everything, rather, to be honest.
Well, I mean, fecal material is microbes, right? So in order to do fecal transplant, which is the process of taking stools from a healthy donor and putting it into an unhealthy donor to try to improve a condition called C. diff, we have to we have to understand the microbes. We have to understand the microbiome. And the microbiome is really what we're seeing right now with COVID. Why is COVID reaching so many people? It's because people's microbiome that is supposed to protect them, their immunity, which is in the gut, is imbalanced, out of balance, and therefore they catch COVID. When you're eating junk food and you're drinking a lot of alcohol and you're drinking coffee and you're putting yourself at risk for catching infections because your gut is just not healthy. So it's all about the microbiome.
No, go ahead, Doc. I'm sorry.
No, that's it. The microbiome basically is our immunity. The microbiome dictates whether we are going to be surviving an infection. Everything's about microbes.
So are you saying that, and you've taken care of quite a few people with COVID? I know we just spoke before the interview and you said right now you're taking care of 30 people with COVID. So are we seeing that the people that are more healthy, that work out, may have a better chance of survival, may, not get as sick as somebody that may have diabetes or other health conditions?
Well, if you look at the population that gets affected from COVID, it's usually the overweight and the people with comorbidities, right? The diabetics, those are the people that are getting COVID. So of course, when you look at that population and you look at their gut flora, which is their gut microbiome, you will notice that there's an imbalance there. There's a lot more, overgrowth, let's say, of what I'm going to call the bad bacteria in layman term, right? And not enough good microbes in the gut that supports them. We did a publication basically that showed that if you feed mice a fatty meal, eventually their microbiome gets altered. And with that, inflammation starts occurring. So if you start thinking the same principle, and you look at the overweight population, you will notice that there is an imbalance and there is inflammation in their guts, right? And so that inflammation, that weight, that imbalance of microbiome predisposes them to catch COVID and to not do so well with COVID. And so that's why we're busy. I mean, if you look at America is overweight. America, on the whole, is overweight. We have an obesity problem, an obesity crisis in this country. And it's an obesity crisis that's extending around the world. I mean, with globalization comes globesity. That's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. And with globesity comes viruses penetrate and disease and autoimmune processes later and all sorts of other complications, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension. I mean, all that stems from a nutritionally depleted society and a society that is overweight.
regardless of how you feel on this, as a person that's a healthcare professional and a doctor in general, are you worried about all the healthcare issues that, people, I know people that have had COVID, they had got long haul of COVID now, and they're still struggling. These issues are going to go into the thousands and the millions of people in this country because a lot of stuff that you just said about the crisis of, food and the junk food all over the place. So we're going to have a lot of healthcare issues, and people, a lot of people in this country don't have healthcare. So is this going to be a huge issue that could put people in debt in general, or even kill people in general?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think healthcare in this country is as much, first of all, we don't have healthcare for all. So
Right.
that's a problem. But even when we do have healthcare for all, it's not the right healthcare. We are promoting a pill pushing society. We are promoting marketing of all sorts of junk in the media that makes people believe that this is making them healthy, but it actually worsens them. Think about all the probiotics that are over the counter that are actually not probiotics. If you read the literature, you will see that there's a study that actually showed that 16 out of 17 of the probiotics that are over the counter are not what it says it is on the label. That's a problem, because what am I doing when I'm taking a product that is supposed to be good for me and that is supposed to be good bacteria, but actually it's not. It's contaminated bacteria or it's dead bacteria. What am I doing when I'm taking that on into my healthy gut? Now, all of a sudden, it's making me unhealthy, right? So there is a problem in this country. And the problem is, we've lost the patient-doctor relationship. We've lost the doctor or the healer, by the way. It's not just doctors that tells the patient, listen, you need to start taking, care of yourself better. You need to there's no pill that's going to make you lose the weight. You need to get on that bike and lose the weight. You need to eat less, move more. We need more of those messages, and we need more of those messages on the media. But unfortunately, those messages, do not support the system that is the business of medicine, the business that has become medicine, and I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a huge amount of people that are unhealthy. Think about the mom who's working 3 jobs to sustain her family, to support, to pay for her cell phones, to pay for her rent, to pay for everything. She doesn't have time to cook a healthy meal, let alone go on that bike and exercise, right? So it is difficult. And I think we have pushed people to just be consumers, buy, instead of just stopping and saying, you know what, I'm not going to buy. I'm just going to stop, and I'm going to invest in my health. When I hear people that are making, especially these venture capitalists that are making like $25,000 a day, and they're like, well, I don't have time to get on the bike. And I think to myself, how much money do you need to support your life? You're getting into a healthcare crisis soon. And, these same venture capitalists 5 years later develop kidney cancer, lung cancer, etc. And then they come begging you for the new treatment. Well, you got to start at the beginning, taking care of your gut, taking care of your health. I think that's why I wrote the book. Let's Talk Shit was basically to educate people on the power of the microbiome, how we can potentially take stools from a healthy donor and maybe change the memory of a patient with Alzheimer's. I had that case that I published, which was one case where the patient remembered his daughter's date of birth after 6 months of fecal transplant. This is a case that shows us the power of the microbiome. And we're coming out with the data on the microbiome of who gets COVID. Why do these people get COVID? What microbes have disappeared from their guts that basically got them to have COVID in the first place? So I think this is an important, the studies that I'm doing are definitely important. We're looking at autism, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. We're looking for markers in the microbiome of prediction, because I believe every disease begins in the gut. Hippocrates said it 2,500 years ago. And therefore, if we see miracles from fecal transplant, we need to look at why did that miracle occur and be more precise, not just put, fecal material on a wall and expect it to stick, put mud on a wall and expect it to stick, not just do fecal transplant on everyone and expect it to be a cure. Let's understand why there was a cure in that one patient with Alzheimer's. Or let's understand the study of Dr. Colleen Kelly of alopecia areata, where 2 patients grew hair after fecal transplant. What was that all about? So the microbiome analysis is very important. My goal is to work with all the doctors that are interested in understanding the microbiome, the top rheumatologists from UCLA, USC, we're working together, the top neurologist from UCLA, USC, same thing, we're working together. Psychiatry to understand mental health. What is it in the microbiome that makes a person anxious? OCD. There's definitely something we're seeing there. We can't really say anything. We don't have enough data, but we are doing the 23andMe of the gut. And I think this is going to be exciting research that's going to come out in the next couple of years if we can ever get out of COVID. And so that's why I stepped in on COVID, because I said, I'm never going to finish my studies on autism and Alzheimer's if I don't play a role with COVID. And of course, my 2 protocols became politicized, which is, crazy, because I think, hydroxychloroquine became a Republican drug when it should also be a Democrat drug. I mean, how many Democrats are on hydroxychloroquine for their lupus or rheumatoid arthritis and have not caught COVID, right? Right. So, I'm in Malibu amongst my friends who are all Democrats, and we're joking because we say, wait, you're on hydroxychloroquine, you haven't caught COVID. So obviously it's doing something to protect you. And they're all laughing because they don't understand how it became so politicized. So that's one. Ivermectin, everybody talks about how it's a anti-parasitic, right? The big scare word, right? People are using an anti-parasitic, a horse-based. Oh my God, how criminal. The drug was given to babies for scabies when the company was making $1,000 per pill, per prescription, okay? Now that it's generic, they can't make any money on it, so they can't support it, right? So, that's the reality. And what is ivermectin? Here's the big shocking. It's not an anti-parasitic. It's not a horse-based. It's a fermented product of a bacteria that's in the soil of Japan. That's it. You've got bacteria in your sauerkraut. You've got products of bacteria in your sauerkraut, right? You've got bacteria in your yogurt. You've got fermented foods. Your cheese that you're eating has got a ton of fermentation in there, right? That's the same thing. Why are we thinking so harsh on this product to try to help people? And by the way, we're going to see from the data that it is actually a crucial element to treating COVID, because it does have a huge role on the microbiome. And we're going to be publishing that.
Well, you just went through a lot of very interesting topics.
Sure.
And no, I appreciate it, because, I didn't even know half of the stuff that you just blurted out, but I think it's extremely interesting. I want to go into a couple of topics you talked about before we go more into COVID. Again, for people that are just listening, this is Dr. Sabine Hazan, and you can go to our website. It's www.sabinehazan.com. So I want to talk about this because
by the way, they should also look at it's progenabiome.com. So they should look into that. There's a lot of data, a lot of publications, a lot of media that we've done. So I encourage them to go to progenabiome.com.
All right. And I'll put that in the description also. I see these commercials, and I want you to say if this is legit or this is just BS. I see these commercials on YouTube about this guy, and he's talking about toxic poop. And he goes through this whole, I don't know if you ever saw this commercial on YouTube, but I see it consistently for some reason. And he's like, if you take this medicine, it'll get rid of all the toxic poop, and and it's getting, infected in your body. What is that all about? Have you heard about that? Is there anything to any of that?
So bacteria in our colons have the ability to secrete toxins, right?
Uh-huh.
But if you keep them in balance, they're going to leave you in peace. If you disrupt them, they will secrete toxins. It's the same principle we're seeing with a bacteria called Clostridium difficile. So Clostridium difficile is a Clostridium. It's a type of bacteria. And basically, when you kill its families and you kill the diversity around the Clostridium, you will notice that Clostridium difficile will start secreting its toxins to kill the host, to secrete diarrhea, to cause diarrhea. Okay. Why? Because that person, somebody took too many antibiotics for something they didn't really need it. They ate a hamburger that was injected with antibiotics, right? So all those antibiotics, and then they took probably some dead bacteria from a probiotic that they thought was a good probiotic. And then next thing you know, they lose their diversity in their gut. They lose their immunity, essentially. They lose the diversity. And when diversity is lost, Clostridium difficile starts taking over the space, right? It's like rent. You have a colon that's fully packed with all these microbes, and then all of a sudden you kill some and you've got vacancy in the colon, right? Mm-hmm. So those vacancies, C. diff starts saying, hey, I've got more space to spread out. So it starts spreading out. When it starts spreading out, it's saying, well, you know what? I don't need the host anymore. I'm going to secrete toxins. So if you're in balance and you're healthy, do nothing. Do exactly what you were doing. If you're having the thought of toxins, and I was talking to someone else, I think it was BuzzFeed the other day, because they said to me, these people are taking medications for worms because they think they have worms in their gut, right? Well, don't take something if you don't know for a fact you have worms, because then you're definitely going to get yourself into a bigger problem, because now you've broken your perfect microbiome that you were born with that gives you a longevity, and you've totally messed it up. And good luck getting it back to normal, right? I mean, you see these people that take antibiotics after antibiotics, and their gut is never the same. And no matter how much probiotics, etc., they do, they can never go back. And that's why they come to us for fecal transplant for C. diff, because it's at the point they've tried medications, they've tried antibiotics, they've tried these expensive drugs from pharmaceutical companies. And then in the end, their wife's poop is the solution that fixes them, Yeah. So I think we need to pay attention to the microbiome. We need to pay attention to what we're doing, and we need to do no harm first. Because when you convince someone, when the media convinces someone to take a pill that basically is killing your worms, you're essentially acting as a doctor, and you're putting yourself in liability, because all you need is that patient to say, well, you know what? I took this pill. I thought I had worms, and look, now I'm totally messed up and I have all these problems. And they can sue the company that basically started that message. So I caution the media and I caution the marketing of companies, because once you're stepping into wanting to be doctors and giving education to people and you're not a doctor, you are taking on the same thing that doctors are taking on every day, the liability. And let me tell you, it's no fun. So you better have some good knowledge and good data to back you up, because in court, it's going to be a slam dunk.
Now, you live in the haven of California, where autism is extremely bad, but it's not just in California, it's growing all over the country as far as
New Jersey,
cases.
It's 1 in 20.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't even know that was that bad. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So can you talk about this? This is such a big epidemic. Is it? Because I hear all these things. We hear the people talk about the vaccines. We hear a lot of people talk now about environmental issues of where you live, that people get autism now. What is your predicament on? I mean, not predicament. What is your opinion, I should say, on this autism? Is it vaccines? Is it environmental? What is it? What's going on with all this?
I don't think we know yet, right? I mean, we're kind of just starting to look at it. I mean, what a shame, first of all, that, there's not that many clinical trials on it.
Right.
for a condition that is so prevalent. I mean, there's more clinical trials on Clostridium difficile, which affects 400,000 people every year, than there is for autism.
Right.
And I think that's a shame because these kids need attention, these mothers need attention. It is definitely a big problem. I think what we've seen from so I inherited the work of Dr. Sidney Feingold, who was very big on autism and felt that a couple of microbes called Clostridium perfringens and the sulfovibrio could be the culprit of autism. And, I went to him when I achieved success in an Alzheimer's patient. And he said to me, well, it's the same thing as autism. You could probably change autism with fecal transplant. And he had joined up with Dr. Tom Barodi, who is the father of fecal transplant. And basically they partnered together to start writing some protocols. When he passed away, I got all his data. And at the same time, unbeknownst to me, the protocol was given to Dr. Adams. And Dr. Adams actually published in January of 2 years ago, published the data that showed that autism was neurological symptoms of autism was improved in 50% of autistic children that they had done fecal transplant on. So that study, got my attention. At the time I was talking on a daily, and I'm still talking on a daily basis to Dr. Barodi. And Dr. Barodi said to me, the future is with these kids is in fecal transplant. And he said, watch it, you're going to be very busy at your lab, because we were analyzing the microbiome of kids with Crohn's disease at the time, right? Mm-hmm. And Crohn's was my passion because I had achieved cures or improvement, I should say. We never really say cures, but improvement where people went into remission with just changing their microbiome. So when I saw that, and I started talking to Dr. Barodi, who had also done like 28 cases of Crohn's disease patients who had improved from fecal transplant, we started collaborating and we started talking about autism. And sure enough, I got a lot of kids come to my office for fecal transplant for autism. So I decided to do an analysis to look into their microbiome. We are a lab that basically has a validated assay. In other words, a microbiome assay that looks at the species. And we are basically doing clinical trials looking at the species of the microbes of human beings. So when we look at them, we look at autism, we look at Crohn's, we look at Parkinson's, and we can kind of see like something that's starting to appear, like a marker for these diseases. So of course, I'm not going to I have a 19-year-old kid who was banging his head, breaking his teeth, and very aggressive with his family and in school. And the family came to me to do fecal transplant on him. 2 years ago, we started writing the protocol with the FDA. Of course, COVID hit. We were approved to do that fecal transplant at the time. When we started doing it, COVID hit and we couldn't do it, so we had to stop it. And then we got reinstated to do it. His sister who is neurotypical and normal, and who we've looked at the microbiome of her. I felt that was a better match for him. And so we started it actually 2 weeks ago. So this is going to be, where we have to see, it's the beginning, but this is going to be, telling. Now, this kid is 19 years old. I'm not sure if it's going to be extremely successful or not, but I think we're going to be doing 30 more kids that are younger. And that's what I'm pushing the FDA now to try to get us approved for those 30 kids, because these parents need it. I mean, we need to see the data. We need to have the FDA see the data, and we need to do more, frankly, more protocols like Dr. Adams did to show the data that it's working. So more doctors feel comfortable to doing it on their kids. And, I think it's also the right protocol. So it's the right donor, potentially, it's the right protocol. There's so many things involved with achieving success in the fecal transplant world. It's what is the colon? Is the colon receptive of the microbiome? Did implantation occur, right? Because when implantation, you have to think of fecal transplant like a garden full of weeds. And basically you're removing all these weeds, you're turning the dirt and you're replanting seeds. So you got to let the garden, you got to water, you got to put some vitamin D, the sun, to let things grow, right? So when I say vitamin D, not vitamin D pills, obviously, but the sun.
Right.
And essentially watch the garden grow. That's what we're doing with fecal transplant, is basically taking microbes and implant, like, first of all, cleaning off the colon completely, washing, like turning the earth like we do with gardening, and then planting, once you wash off everything, and we do different things to wash, then you start planting, but you have to make sure it's the right microbes that you're planting, that the mucosa is receptive to those microbes. So only by understanding what we're doing, only by looking at these assays of microbes and before and after fecal transplant can we really understand what's going on in the world of fecal transplant. And that's where we're going to have to be in the future.
It's just fascinating, like, because I never heard any of this stuff, but it's so fascinating to learn about this. I really appreciate you coming on and really speaking about this, because this could really, if it does work, like you said, Doc, it could really change a lot of people's lives for the better, whether it's COVID or whether it's autism, which is a huge epidemic in this country. We need to get that solved as fast as possible for the kids who turn into
and there's
adults.
so many more. There's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Right. I mean, everything is increasing. So that's why we got to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What are we doing that's increasing all that? Because unfortunately, mankind is very business oriented, right? And we keep pushing one business model after one business model. But then eventually what happens when you're the venture capitalist that invested in this product, and that product caused your grandchild to be autistic, then what do you do from there? And then good luck finding the good microbiome when you've, mass globalized everything, So I think we have to be careful, and that's the only way that I could say it.
Dr. Zahn, how would you end giving these millennials and people in general that aren't millennials that are just listening some hope?
Well, I think the hope is really with understanding the microbiome. That's going to give us answers as to why some people have mental health issue, why some people have an addiction to drugs, why some people have Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism. I think the data and the research that's coming out of our lab as fast as we can is going to be hope for a lot of people, a lot of kids that are bipolar, or kids that are depressed or suicidal, because with answers onto which microbe causes that might come, treatment. And I think the first order of business is really to understand the microbiome. And then the second order of business is once you understand which microbe is affected, how to keep it at peace and how to decrease it from getting worse.
Doc, where can people find more about you and help you out in this great mission that you're doing?
So progenabiome.com, www.progenabiome.com. So it's from your progeny to your biome. That's why I named it that, but it's Progenabiome. There's actually a lot of publications in there, the clinical trials we're doing. Donations would help us because that's how we analyze these microbes of autistic children. So we have a nonprofit microbiome foundation, research foundation. So if people could donate, that would be great.
All right. And everybody, thanks so much for listening. We'll put all that information in the description box. And Doc, thanks so much for your time. It was really informative. I really hope we can do this again down the road.
Perfect.